This hour, we've got details on Canada's dollar-for-dollar response to Donald Trump's new regime of punishing tariffs and the latest well-worn intimidation tactics from the U.S. president himself. Here's a live look at the lake known around the world as Lake Ontario, or as Donald Trump would have it, Lake America. The U.S. president reached into his familiar playbook of taunts today to muse about renaming the Great Lake. Canada's industry minister was asked about it last hour. Mélanie Joly was undaunted and highlighted the contrasting approaches in D.C. and Ottawa.
We'll always call it Lake Ontario. Great Lakes. Period. I really think that while all these shenanigans are happening, we'll just be smart and we'll be strategic and we'll fight back.
Fighting back is exactly what the federal government is doing. It's taking a two-pronged approach, slapping the U.S. with new targeted counter tariffs and introducing protections for workers and companies. The finance minister says it's a measured, serious, and strategic approach.
Canada will match the United States tariffs dollar for dollar, rate for rate. Canada's counter tariffs are designed primarily to provide protection for Canadian industry impacted by U.S. tariffs and allow them to compete against U.S. products in the Canadian market. It's all about fairness, it's all about level playing field, it's all about supporting Canadian workers and Canadian businesses.
The CBC's Olivia Stefanovich is on the story. She joins us live from our Ottawa bureau. So Olivia, tell us more about what was announced and how it will work.
Well, Andrew, this is all in response to the Trump administration leveling a new 50% tariff against hundreds of Canadian goods, a $27 billion worth of Canadian exports that go to the U.S. And so in response, we're learning that Canada will match those tariffs dollar for dollar, matching the amount of tariffs that are going to be hit on American products coming into Canada. So $27 billion worth of American products. And there's also going to be support here for businesses. Now, when it comes to counter tariffs specifically, what Canada has decided to do is to tariff the industries that the Americans are targeting. So tariff those American dairy products that are coming into Canada, fish, furniture, appliances, even steel and aluminum. And these tariffs will range, Andrew, from 15, 25, and 50%. And in fact, the industries that will be hit hardest by these latest tariffs by Canada to the U.S. are the industries that are most affected by the Trump administration. So steel and aluminum, you're going to see those tariffs increased from 25% to 50%. The federal government imposing those tariffs on American steel and aluminum to match the 50% tariffs that are in effect against Canadian steel and aluminum. There's also $7.5 billion here to protect Canadian businesses and workers who are impacted by these new U.S. levies. Here's more from the finance minister about how that portion is going to work.
New tariff imposed by the U.S. administration is going to be disproportionately affecting small and medium-sized businesses. That's why we're here today, and that's why we have decided to put I would say, a very substantial support package. We're talking about $7.5 billion to support workers and to support industry. But you have to get back to first principle. This is about protecting a Canadian industry impacted by U.S. tariff, and I've said it yesterday, this is about the level playing field.
So the federal government says this $7.5 billion is going to be available for businesses and workers who are, again, impacted by these new U.S. tariffs. This is going to help businesses with shovel-ready projects, for example. If they have some projects already in the go, this will help them with those projects to see them to the finish line. It will also help companies with cash flow. And for workers, this will help beef up the employment insurance system so they will not be left struggling. The government wants to step in to help those workers to keep as many jobs in place as long as possible. And the federal government says that the counter levies that it's preparing in retaliation to the new American levy that was just put into effect over the weekend, that will take effect on September 8th. So that's the Tuesday after Labor Day.
And Olivia, what did ministers say about their approach to handling all of this?
Well, they say they want to take a targeted approach to match what the U.S. is doing and to make sure that Canadian products can compete with American products on Canadian store shelves. So basically, the idea here is to make it so that the American products, for example, aren't cheaper than the Canadian ones and vice versa. It's to really level the playing field, as the ministers said during the press conference. They were asked, though, Andrew, about a suggestion from Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who's actually been calling for energy exports to be affected by Canada's retaliation, critical minerals, electricity. He's called for electricity, for example, to be cut off to the United States, for a surcharge to be added, and for Canada to even use oil as a leverage. And of course, this is controversial because not all premiers agree with this. We certainly heard from Alberta Premier Daniel Smith raising concerns about this, saying oil shouldn't be used as a leverage. The ministers were asked about whether they would target Canadian energy and critical minerals. They say at this time they're just trying to match what the U.S. is doing and take a measured response. They're also anticipating and waiting to see if the Trump administration will follow through on its threat of new 50% tariffs next year against Canadian autos, because that's something new that the president is now threatening against Canada. And here's what the industry minister has to say about that.
I've been in contact with the president of Ford Canada, the president of Honda Canada, and the president of Toyota Canada, following the threats of 50% of tariffs against auto. And so, of course, we'll fight back. And of course, emotions are high, but while this is all happening, we'll be smart and we'll be strategic and we'll fight for every of these jobs.
So right now, the tariffs against auto on both sides of the border sits at 25%, has not been increased, even though the president is now threatening a 50% tariff against Canadian autos next year. The government's still waiting to see if the president will follow through on that threat. The ministers were also asked, Andrew, during this press conference about a call from the opposition to release the full text of the proposed deal that the prime minister walked away from in these trade negotiations with the U.S. They did not promise that, but they did say that they will listen to the opposition for any suggestions they may have about how to move forward in the coming days and months. And the Prime Minister did speak to the opposition leaders today to speak to that, to hear from them, and to also fill them in on where things stand with the United States.
Olivia, thank you. CBC's Olivia Stefanovich live in Ottawa.